All right, so thank you everyone for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carolyn Margolin. I am the Careers in Science and Technology Advisor over at the Loeb Center. And you are here for the third installment of our Taste Talk About Science and Technology Experience series that started this fall. And I'm so incredibly pleased to be joined by our speaker, Jason Moore, and my co-host, Lee Spector from the Computer Science Department and the Artificial Intelligence in the Liberal Arts. I want to get the title right. Who was kind enough to connect me with Jason to present tonight. And so I'm going to ask Lee to introduce the AILA program and Dr. Moore. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to turn over the screen to Lee and Jason.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carolyn. So I'm Lee Spector. I'm a professor of computer science here at Amherst. So I do want to say a few words about artificial intelligence in the liberal arts. As most of you probably realize, AI technology is very rapidly becoming pervasive, playing an increasingly important role in nearly every facet of modern society. It's already having significant impacts on science, on commerce, on politics, on medicine, as you'll hear more about shortly, on media, on the arts, and on issues connected to almost every facet of life in modern society. In addition, aside from its practical implications, AI is raising fundamental questions about the nature of our own minds, what it means to be human, how we should treat one another, how we should treat non-human minds. It presents tremendous new opportunities and also potentially catastrophic dangers. So the premise of AI in the liberal arts at Amherst is that students and faculty in all disciplines, not just computer science, certainly, should have ways to engage with these issues, to explore and use AI technology, and potentially to play a role in the future that this technology will have in human society. In addition to sponsoring talks, we're aiming to provide accessible AI software and hardware, along with mentors who can work with students and faculty across disciplines to understand and make use of AI technology. We have some really exciting plans, which you should see rolling out in the coming months, but we're also very open to new ideas. So if you have ideas about things that we might do, please get in contact with me. You can find out more from liberal-arts.ai. Okay, now I'm excited to introduce Dr. Jason Moore, who will give a brief presentation on machine learning in biomedical research, and then stick around for another brief, but a bit of a question and answer session. So Dr. Jason Moore is the founding chair of the Department of Computational Biomedicine at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. Before moving to Cedars-Sinai, he was at the University of Pennsylvania, where he was the Edward Rose Professor of Informatics, the director of the Penn Institute for Biomedical Informatics, and a senior associate dean. Before that, he was at Dartmouth, where he was director of the Institute for Quantitative Biomedical Sciences. And before that, he was the director of the Advanced Computing Center for Research and Education at Vanderbilt University, where he launched their first high-performance computer center. Dr. Moore earned a PhD in human genetics and an MS in applied statistics from the University of Michigan. He leads an active NIH-funded research program focused on the development of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms for the analysis of complex biomedical data. He is an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, among several other prestigious professional associations. He also serves as the editor-in-chief of the journal Biodata Mining. Beyond all of that, I can tell you that I have known Dr. Moore for many years, and that he is one of the smartest and also one of the kindest and most generous people working in AI. His work is a stellar example of the use of AI for the good of humanity, specifically through biomedical research. I am delighted that he is able to spend some time with us this evening to talk about machine learning in biomedical research. Jason, please take it away.
All right, well, thanks, Carolyn, and thanks, Lee, for the invitation. It's great to see all of you tonight, and thanks for that introduction. And I also think very highly of Lee, and he's also one of the smartest AI researchers I know, and I've learned a lot from him over the years, so thank you, Lee. And so what I want to do today is do this presentation from the point of view of challenges, and my goal is not to scare you away from this field, and as you see, there are a lot of significant challenges that we're facing to use AI to improve people's lives, but to get you excited about it and to hopefully stimulate some of you to learn more about it and maybe even enter the field of AI in medicine, which is a really hot field, and we desperately need smart people in computer science, data science, applied mathematics, statistics, etc., engineering, bioengineering. All of you have a tremendous amount to contribute to this area, and we do not have enough AI researchers. So it's an exciting time to be in medicine because we can now measure lots of information about people. We can measure their DNA, their genomes. We can measure environmental factors, lots of clinical data, things that we can measure, lots of laboratory tests, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, all those things, the toxins that are circulating in your blood. And so the goal is really to take all that information and use it to predict an individual's risk of disease, diagnose disease, but also tailor treatments and therapies to individuals. And so this is a hot new area called precision medicine, where we're really trying to understand what makes you special as an individual and how we can tailor healthcare to you instead of treating you with the same drug that we give everybody, give you a drug that is tailored to your specific biology so that it can be more effective and produce fewer side effects. So that's the goal here, okay? That's what we want to do. And one of the challenges is that we see that human health is a complex system. And what I mean by that is that it's difficult to predict the outcome, your health outcome, from just knowing all the component parts. And so down here at the bottom, we have the components of a complex system. In this case, these are genes, environmental factors, all the kinds of things we can measure in humans. All those factors are organized into subsystems, and subsystems are organized into, on this slide, what are called control structures. Think of these as like biochemical pathways, like cholesterol metabolism, blood pressure regulation. There are lots of factors that come together to regulate your blood pressure or regulate your cholesterol levels. So that's what we mean by a control structure. And those control structures all interact with each other to produce a health outcome, something like heart failure or a heart attack. And so the point of this slide is to say that it's difficult to predict a health outcome like a heart attack or heart failure from knowledge of these individual components. You have to understand how all these components interact in time and space. And so that's where this complexity comes from. Now, it's an exciting time to be in biomedical research because we can measure so much information. And that's what this slide shows us, all the different kinds of information that we can measure. Even things like the microbes that inhabit our gut tell us a lot about health. And so it's an exciting time because we can measure all these various things and then put all that data together to study health outcomes. Now, you put big data together with the complexity of health outcomes, and that creates a big problem. You have too much data and you have a system that's too complex. So how are we going to study that? And that's why I think artificial intelligence has a very important role to play to help us sift through all this data in a way that embraces the complexity of the problem. So I'm going to divide this presentation into two pieces. I'm going to first talk about the challenges of AI in medicine from a data perspective. What are the data challenges that we have to worry about? And then I'm going to talk about the machine learning, specific machine learning and artificial intelligence challenges. So the data itself is extremely complex, and this slide tries to encapsulate all the different kinds of data that we can measure on human subjects, things like medications, demographics are things like your sex, your age, your gender, race, ethnicity, genetic, all those kinds of things. Encounters are encounters with clinicians. Diagnoses are disease diagnoses. Procedures are things like surgical procedures. Diagnostics are ordered when they want to learn, a clinician wants to learn more about you, and then you have a diagnostic result, like which would be a cholesterol level or a blood pressure. Genetics, social history, family history of disease, the symptoms that you're experiencing. You know, just take a look at COVID, right? COVID has a wide range of different symptoms and they're different in different people. Lifestyle, you know, do you exercise? You know, what kinds of things do you do in your personal time? Socioeconomic status is extremely important. Social networks and environment. And all these data are split into, we think about structured and unstructured data. Structured data are where we have a variable, we have a particular outcome that we can measure. It's a numeric or value. Unstructured data is all the text that comes with healthcare, like all the notes that the doctor takes, or even like your Facebook postings, right? That's unstructured data. It's free-form text. And how do we turn that into something that we can then study with a machine learning algorithm? So data, and EHR is the electronic health record. So that's the database where all this data goes when you go see your doctor or go in for a procedure. And so the challenge is, how do you integrate all this data and study it all together so that we can maximize the information we have about a patient? And all these different data types have their own peculiarities, their own complexities, their own sources of noise and measurement error and all kinds of things. And so putting all this together is a big problem. And the data itself is messy, derived from electronic health records, because first of all, it's not designed for research, it's designed for clinical care. There's no study design. The technology is inconsistent. This is when I started working with this kind of data, I was surprised to learn how often the technology changes. You might go in for brain imaging if you have Alzheimer's disease, for example, and the brain imaging technology that was used last year might not be the same technology that's used this year. And that introduces noise in the data because the technology is changing, the measurement error is changing. And so you have to take that into consideration. If you build a machine learning prediction algorithm using the last 10 years of data, and some of the machinery changes in the next 10 years of data, your predictions aren't going to be as good. Data can be sparse. This is a figure from a paper from a couple of years ago. Each row is a different clinical variable from the electronic health record, and each column is a different patient. And the white is the missing data. So this is a huge problem. All this variable missing data creates a lot of problems for machine learning. What do you do with that? How do you impute it? Do you fill it in? Do you ignore it? Do you code for it? Is the data missing at random? Is it biased in some way? Some key data are not captured. For example, we don't capture environmental data very well, which is extremely important. The database itself is inflexible. There's temporal components because patients come in and out of health systems on a longitudinal basis. So anyway, I think you get the idea. The data itself is very, very messy and inconsistent. The other thing is when you want to know whether somebody has cancer or diabetes or heart disease, you go into the electronic health record, and the first thing we look at are what are called billing codes or ICD codes. So these are the codes that doctors use to say whether a patient has a particular disease or a particular health outcome. But those billing codes are called billing codes because they're used for billing. They go to the insurance company, and the insurance company then reimburses based on that code. So the important thing here is that doctors aren't assigning these disease diagnosis codes necessarily because they most accurately capture the disease the patient has, but sometimes they assign them because they maximize the amount of money the insurance company is going to give to the hospital. So now if you go in to do a research study and you're trying to predict disease, and the disease diagnoses are based on these billing codes, there might be error introduced because the doctors aren't assigning accurately. Just this 428 here for this ICD code, this is heart failure, and 428.1 is the code for heart failure on the left side. So what we do instead is to get a more accurate picture of whether somebody really has a disease, we look at a whole bunch of other things. We look at the clinical notes, we look at the tests that have been done, And we put all that into an algorithm that determines whether somebody really has heart failure, and don't rely purely on the billing code. We need standards and terminologies. When I say heart failure here at Cedars-Sinai, does that mean the same thing at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston? So we need standards and terminology so we're all speaking the same language. And so this is a big computational focus in the field, and very important. And we need common data models. So we all label things differently. And so if we have different sources of clinical data, we need to map them to what's called a common data model, shown here in orange. So we can be sure that when we're doing research studies across institutions, across hospitals, that we're actually studying the exact same data. And you'd be surprised at how often you're not studying the same data. So this is important. And biomedical ontologies are important. These describe the relationships in the data. So this provides a much better description of the data and allows us to make more accurate inferences of the data. And ontologies can be used to construct better databases where you understand the relationships between the different things that you're studying. And then if you have common data models and you have a good ontology, then you can do data integration and being able to integrate all the different kinds of data in the same database and understanding those relationships so we can study the data together with our machine learning algorithms. And you need a place to put it. So there's a lot of interest in data warehouses. So Cedars-Sinai Medical Center here in Los Angeles has what we call an enterprise data warehouse, where lots of the clinical data from the electronic health record is amassed and linked and formatted and integrated so that we can study it with our machine learning algorithms. But building a warehouse, a data warehouse, is a computational challenge, and everybody struggles with this. Now, working with clinical data brings up a whole host of data security and privacy issues, right? You don't want your private clinical data, your disease diagnoses, the medications that you're on, getting out into the public. You don't want others to know that private information. So this is something that health information technology groups at hospitals around the country worry about on a minute-to-minute basis during the day. And I promise you, there are plenty of people that lose sleep every night over worrying about how to protect the data. And you've probably seen some of the hacking reports. This slide here shows the data breaches statistics for the year 2018. And these are incidents of hacking where somebody either through a malware attack or through some other type of data breach got access to clinical data, downloaded it and held it for ransom, like a ransomware attack, or even made it publicly available, which is pretty scary. So this is a very real problem and something we worry about all the time. And it affects research, because if I'm doing research with clinical data from Cedars-Sinai, they don't want that on my laptop. They don't want me to take that to go to Boston to a conference with that information on my laptop. What if my laptop got stolen? Or what if I'm putting it on an insecure server that somebody could more easily hack? So this is a huge, huge issue. And it's a really hot area for computer scientists to get into. And then data sharing and governance, which is somewhat related to the privacy and security issues, but their hospitals and health centers have multiple layers of checks and balances around keeping the data safe. And how do you decide who to give access to? And how do you track who's using the data and what they're doing with it? How do you make those decisions? So I've served on these data governance committees, and it's very interesting, and it's very complex. There's a lot of policies and rules and regulations and decisions that have to be made around data. Okay, so as you can see, working with clinical data, with biomedical research data is difficult for a whole host of reasons, but it's also very exciting. I see it as a challenge. How do you extract the useful information that we really need from these data? And computer science has a role to play in every aspect of this. And there are no shortcuts. It's no matter how you do it, it's hard, it's difficult, it's time consuming. But the reward is that we can help people, we can improve patients' lives. So that's the reward. So it's a very worthy, it's a challenging goal, but a very worthy goal. Any questions at this point? Feel free to just unmute and ask a question if you want. Okay, so let me move on to the machine learning challenges. And I have 10 machine learning challenges. There are plenty more. So this is how I think about the machine learning pipeline. We have all these different kinds of data that I've just talked about. We want to integrate the data as I've just talked about. Now you can imagine with the kind of data I just talked about, you could have thousands, hundreds of thousands of variables, even millions of variables with genetic and genomic measurements. The first thing you might want to do is reduce that to a more meaningful subset. That's what we call feature selection. So that's a very important part of machine learning, is making sure that you're working with the most informative set of variables or features. Now, the data doesn't always come to us in the right representation, so you might need to do some feature engineering. You might need to recode the data or combine features in some way. And again, that makes it easier for the machine learning if you do a good job with that. Then you need to choose a machine learning algorithm, and there are dozens and dozens of machine learning algorithms, each with thousands or millions of parameter settings. And so this is a big challenge in machine learning. How do you know what the right machine learning algorithm is to use? Then once you have a good machine learning model, you need to interpret it. What is it telling you about the biological or clinical problem that you're studying? You have to translate it into something the biologist, the clinician can understand. And then once you do that, then maybe you design an experiment and validate it. And if you validate it, then hopefully you can put it into clinical application for what I talked about earlier, precision medicine. So you can predict a patient's health, you can predict their drug outcome. All right, so this is how I think about the pipeline. So the first question is, what machine learning method do you pick? This is a big challenge because there are so many, and I love this figure. If you Google machine learning visualization, you'll find this figure. And I forgot to put the reference for the figure here. But here are 3 data sets, and let's think about maybe the red dots are people with disease and the blue people without the disease. And you have 2 variables measured. Maybe this is age and body mass index. And the goal of machine learning is to find a mathematical function that discriminates the red dots from the blue dots. It's really, I mean, conceptually, it's that simple. But the implementation is very difficult because every machine learning algorithm looks at the data differently. So here are 7 different methods. Some of these are commonly used methods like random forests. And you can see that each one looks at the data differently. Linear support vector machines just drawing lines from the data saying, okay, I'm going to separate blue and red dots just by drawing a line. Whereas a radial basis function support vector machine is drawing these curved functions through the data. Decision trees, random forests are drawing these kind of squares around the data. The numbers, by the way, are the predictive accuracy. So the higher the number, the better. And you can see that each method does a different, has a different performance. On this middle data set, this Gaussian process does the best, 90% predictive accuracy, whereas this linear method is terrible, less than flipping a coin. Whereas on this bottom data set, all the methods do pretty equally well. So this is one of the big challenges, is you don't know what the right machine learning method is for your data set before you do the analysis. So how do you pick the method to use? I mentioned feature selection. We have potentially too many features in biomedical research to feed into a machine learning algorithm. So how do you pick an informative subset? Well, it turns out there are a whole bunch of algorithms for doing that. I've published papers on this relief family of algorithms, which I like a lot. But you could do it based on biology. You could use your knowledge of biology. So if you're studying diabetes, you know insulin metabolism is important. You could focus your feature set based on things that are involved in insulin metabolism. And that makes it more tractable for the machine learning algorithm and perhaps more interpretable. Feature engineering is, like I said, the features don't always come to us in the right representation. So we might want to combine them in some way. This is a paper we did, published in the journal that Lee's editor-in-chief of, and with one of Lee's former students, Bill LaCava, who's now on the faculty at Harvard. And this was an algorithm he developed for combining features using mathematical functions. And he worked out a very powerful way to do that. and thereby sort of taking some of the heavy lifting off the machine learning algorithm. You do the feature engineering beforehand, so the machine learning algorithm doesn't have to. It can focus more on the classification. Reproducibility is something we worry about a lot. This is a paper from one of my former students, Casey Green, who now leads a group at the University of Colorado. And different versions of software and different operating systems, different libraries can give different results. And so if you publish a paper and somebody's trying to replicate those results, but they're using a different version of a software or a different operating system, they might get different results, and that's not good. And so Docker containers are a way to do that, where you wrap up all the code, all the versions in a Docker container, and that can be shared. And then all somebody has to do is load their data and run the analysis, and they're using exactly the same libraries. Everything's the same, and that can improve reproducibility. Benchmarking is something I'm very interested in. How do you evaluate machine learning algorithms? How do you know they're working? How do you know they're powerful for the kind of problems that you're solving? And so we put a lot of effort into how do you generate realistic simulated data to evaluate machine learning algorithms. We have a nice paper that's hopefully will get published soon in this space. Interpretation is one of the biggest challenges of machine learning, if not the biggest challenge. You can generate lots of machine learning models, but how do you determine whether they're truly useful? Are they going to provide some new insight? They might be predictive, but do they tell you anything new? This was a paper one of my postdocs did, where we took a decision tree shown here at the top, which is a simple kind of machine learning algorithm, and combined it with a visualization. So this is the actual data down here organized with a hierarchical cluster analysis and a heat map. So you can start to look at the patterns in the data and relate that to different parts of the machine learning model as a way to have a deeper understanding of what the machine learning model is doing. But this is a huge challenge. This is one of my favorite aspects of machine learning, is this idea of what we do in machine learning is we say, does the model have a good predictive accuracy? And that's the only objective we use. And that would be an objective measure. But there are a whole bunch of subjective measures which could be equally or more important. We do machine learning because we want to be surprised. We want to find those interesting, novel things in the data. But are they useful? What's interesting to me might not be interesting to you. That's what makes it subjective. Or what's useful for me might not be useful for you. But this is very important, I think, to work into machine learning. How do you reward a machine learning algorithm? And I think incorporating subjective measures are important. This is one of my favorite aspects. This is an area I work a lot in. I'm very motivated and to make machine learning accessible and easy. We live in a data-rich world. Everybody should be able to do machine learning that wants to do it. They shouldn't have to go talk to Lee, who's an expert, and say, Lee, I want to do machine learning. Can you help me? We want to empower people to be able to do machine learning, just like people are empowered to run a simple t-test or a linear regression, right? There are plenty of user-friendly statistical packages out there. Why aren't there user-friendly machine learning packages? So this is one we developed. It's an automated machine learning package. You load a CSV file, you push a button, the AI takes over and does the machine learning for you, and it learns from experience. So this is called Pen AI, and I developed this at the University of Pennsylvania, and we're moving the code base here to Cedars-Sinai, and we're going to rebrand it and move it forward. But this is designed for the naive user, so not for computer scientists, not for data scientists, but for biologists, clinicians, epidemiologists, social scientists, et cetera. Fairness and bias is a huge area. Clinical data is biased. For example, Black patients who go to the emergency room get treated differently than white patients. It's a matter of fact. It's a terrible thing, but those biases manifest themselves in the data, and an AI algorithm, machine learning algorithm, can capitalize on that and actually do a disservice to those Black patients. And so this is a huge, very important and timely issue in AI in medicine. And if you're interested, I would recommend this book. Michael Kearns and Aaron Roth are computer science professors at the University of Pennsylvania, and they published this fantastic book called The Ethical Algorithm. And they go through lots of examples of how AI algorithms are biased, how data are biased, and how that manifests itself. Big problem. And the last thing I'll end on is this idea of the learning health system, that we here at Cedars-Sinai, we're a hospital, we treat patients, but we also do research, and we want that research to feed back to the health system so we can improve patient care. So we're very focused on the patient here, and that's the motivation for our research. And so the idea of a learning health system is that patient data is accessible, we can analyze it using machine learning algorithms, we can interpret the results, we can deliver those results back to clinicians and change practice. And so this process needs to be seamless and continuous and easy. And that's the idea of a learning health system, and machine learning has an important role to play in that. So these are the 20 challenges. There are many, many more, but I wanted to give you a taste. And hopefully my goal, as I said, to get you excited about this and think about it as a career that you might want to go into. So again, challenges, no. Research opportunities, yes. And that's my email address. Feel free to email me later if you have questions or if you want some advice or anything I can help you with. And I'm on Twitter at morejh. And if you follow me, I'll try to see that and follow you back. So Lee and Carolyn, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jason. I have a couple of questions, but I want to open it up first to hear if anybody else in the audience has any questions. If so, please unmute.
I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned the fairness and discrimination within the analysis of AI, and I was wondering if you could give some examples about how you or others have actually combated bias against marginalized identities.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are ways to do the machine learning analysis. For example, you, as a simple example, you could do the machine learning analysis separately in blacks and whites or males and females and look and see if the results are different and try to understand why the results are different. Are they different because there is some underlying cultural or biological difference? You know, if blacks and whites have different predictive models, that could be due to environmental differences, right? In a city like Philadelphia, Black patients tend to come from lower socioeconomic status or poorer neighborhoods where there's poorer nutrition or less education or more air pollution than white patients. And so that could be a fundamental reason why you're seeing a difference. Or it could be like the example I gave with the emergency room. It could be that there's inherent bias in the practice of healthcare, that maybe you're prescribing less effective, cheaper drugs to Black patients than white patients, or you're triaging patients in the emergency room differently, or you're, Black patients aren't taken as seriously when they present with pain, right? So let's say Black patients had a surgery and they're feeling a lot of pain and they go back to their doctor. Because they're Black, they may not be given the same consideration as a white patient. So these are systemic biases, in some cases outright racism, that exist in healthcare systems that we need to root out and get rid of, but that can manifest in the data. So there are inherently biological, cultural, environmental differences between Black and white patients, but there are also differences that could be due to unconscious bias or outright racism.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, like a follow-up question on that. I imagine that there are probably difficulties in redressing those biases, like particularly in funding or just in sort of convincing people that there's actually a problem. Have you ever encountered that, or are you familiar with what the process is like to sort of acknowledge a bias in like a model and then actually go back and fix it?
But we're really just scratching the tip of the iceberg with this area of AI and bias. I think we're at that stage now where we're starting to recognize that it's a real problem. It's a problem that needs to be addressed. We're starting to talk about it. but there are very few people actually doing research to uncover and eliminate these biases. Actually, one of Lee's former students, Bill LaCava, who worked with me, who I mentioned went to Harvard, that's his area of research is AI and fairness and bias in AI. So he was motivated to get into that area. That was a new area for him in the last few years. And so we need more people like that, right? He comes from an engineering background and got into AI research and got interested in bias and fairness. So we just need so many more people addressing that. And you mentioned funding, right? So the National Institutes of Health need to provide funding opportunities to motivate us to write grants, think about new research strategies that can address that issue. But there has to be funding provided. There has to be a motivation and a reward for doing it. Institutions need to fund it and motivate people to study it. So we have a lot of work to do. We're in the early stages of this. We're in the post George Floyd era. So I think that's, that was a positive thing that came from that unfortunate incident that, that there's sort of a new focus on these kinds of issues. And so hopefully that momentum continues and grows and we get more people working on these problems. But, to answer your question more specifically, I don't think there are very many examples where people have taken a machine learning model, determined that it was biased, and then rooted out the causes of that bias.
I want to jump in there, follow up that excellent question with the observation that that's a great reason why people with a liberal arts education and a broader perspective than purely an engineering perspective need to go into AI. But I have a question for you, Jason. For other students with a wide range of interests, but who are broadly educated, so coming from Amherst, from a liberal arts education, but who do have a major in computer science or math or related discipline. Do you have any suggestions about how they might approach a career path in biomedical research that would take advantage of their broader expertise, their broader education, and allow them to perhaps do more that crosses disciplinary boundaries? Anything outside of the traditional the path by which people enter biomedical research.
Are you talking about graduate programs?
Yes, or graduate programs or whatever they'll do after graduation. I'm just wondering if for this kind of student, do you have any particular suggestions rather than that would be more something they might pursue that you wouldn't necessarily recommend to somebody who went to a research university and just studied, say, computer science?
Yeah, so for the liberal arts side, I'm broadly what's called a biomedical informatician. So biomedical informatics is a biomedical specialty or discipline that is concerned with the application of computers, technology, software, algorithms, AI, machine learning, and healthcare. And there are PhD programs in biomedical informatics all over the country. And so that's something that you could look at. And the reason I mention that discipline specifically is because there is a very strong kind of liberal arts side to it. It's, I think people outside, when biologists, clinicians, when they think of biomedical informatics, they only think of computing. But there is a social science side to it, which is very important and is part of the formal definition from the American Medical Informatics Association. So for example, I mentioned the electronic health record. There's a lot of interest in the usability of the electronic health record. How do clinicians interact with the computer, with the information? What's the best way to present that information to a clinician? So this really gets into the social science side of things, this concept of usability. And I think in AI more specifically, there's a lot of interest in explainability of AI. And I think that crosses over into the liberal arts side of things. And so I think, yes, you can go into biomedical informatics and exploit your valuable liberal arts education and knowledge and have a huge impact in the biomedical space. There is definitely a place for you, an important place for you. And the social science, arts side of things is extremely important. We have a clinician here at Cedars-Sinai using virtual reality to help patients deal with pain. Right. And I think that kind of crosses over into the liberal arts side of things. How do you, what's artistically, what kind of images should you present to a patient to make them to deal with pain, to make them feel more comfortable? So I think there's an artistic side to that, in addition to the social science of, how do you get people to use this kind of technology and socialize them to it and study the psychological outcomes of using technology. So yeah, I think liberal arts has a very, very important role to play in biomedical informatics. And even if you don't want to go to graduate school, I think there are plenty of opportunities for somebody with a bachelor's degree in computer science with a strong liberal arts education to go work as a computational researcher, a data scientist, a computer programmer, working for somebody who in biomedical informatics who explores these more social, psychological, or artistic sides of computing.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much, Jason. Is there another question? I do have one more I want to ask, but is there anybody else who has? Yes, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I also had a question. So you're working at sort of like a hospital academic institution, but you also mentioned you were working at like R1 universities before. Is the research experience been different, or like the grant experience been different? I imagine you also work with like a different group of people.
It's very similar. Cedars-Sinai has, created a very academic environment here. We have professorial titles. We have all the same research infrastructure. We have a dean, we have a PhD program, we have some master's programs. So Cedars-Sinai has really built an academic arm underneath the hospital. We're not a university, but we do grant degrees, we do research. So it's very similar, but with some important differences. The administration is different. One of the reasons I came here is administratively, Cedars-Sinai, universities are very complex places, as I'm sure Carolyn and Lee can tell you ad nauseum. Very complex, lots of layers of bureaucracy. Things move, real change moves slowly. But here at Cedars-Sinai, we have a very simple administrative structure. As a department chair, I report directly to the dean, and the dean reports directly to the CEO, who oversees the entire health system. And it's really that simple. And I get to make a lot of decisions unilaterally. And I don't have to go through layers of committees and provosts and all the university stuff. So I would say I get to be in an academic environment here, but with a simpler administrative structure. We're a very wealthy hospital, so we have a lot of money. So that's also different from most universities who are always strapped for cash. So I have the luxury of having lots of resources here, which is nice. And so that was very appealing to me. And coming here was a simpler administrative structure, more resources, and a focus on patient care and making a difference.
It's fabulous.
I just wanted to check, Mihaela, I see you have a reaction up. I just want to see if you were trying to ask a question. Or maybe not.
I think Mihaela came.
No, I cannot. Okay. I don't know what's wrong with my laptop. I'm not on school. I have my home laptop that doesn't like me. It's very interesting. I am speechless. I just wanted to know more about the machine learning algorithms. If there are some specific new algorithms now that give more hope into this research.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, as I briefly mentioned, I work in this hot news space called automated machine learning. which is really less than 10 years old. And we developed one of the very first in the world automated machine learning methods using genetic programming, which Lee is an expert in. And the idea is to let the computer build the machine learning pipeline so the human doesn't have to, or at least doesn't have to initially, right? So the computer is doing some of the hard work for you. And this space is just absolutely exploding. Everybody's doing automated machine learning now. And I think it holds tremendous promise for real world applications and bringing machine learning to the masses. Lee, you might be interested to know there was just the very first automated machine learning conference has been announced next year in Baltimore. And so that's a sign that the field is starting to coalesce and mature, which, you know, anytime a new field starts a conference, that's a good sign that there's momentum and interest and there's, you know, something's happening. So, Michaela, I would say automated machine learning is what I would point people to. The other thing I'm really excited about is graph neural networks. You know, everybody talks about deep learning neural networks, and there's a lot of excitement in that area, and rightly so. But graph neural networks are, is the type of deep learning that I'm really interested in. Where, you know, in biology, we think a lot about graphs, how different molecules and genes and proteins are related to each other. And you can take those biological relationships and use it to structure a neural network. So that the variables, the features that are feeding into a deep learning neural network are organized by the structure of the network. And so so this is exciting to me because you're using the biological knowledge to structure the neural network. And the results that we have so far using that approach are much better than just a standard deep learning approach that is ignorant about the biology. So graph neural networks, I think, are going to really take off in certain domains like biology, where you really care about the structure of the data and the relationships in the data.
Thank you.
So the question I was going to ask you was about automated machine learning, or AutoML. I think that is very exciting. I was going to ask you, so in automated machine learning, the machine learning is one step in your pipeline. And AutoML is using machine learning to do some of the hard work in doing the machine learning, right? It's applying machine learning to improving that step. I wonder if you have thoughts about machine learning being applied to the other steps. So sort of automating some of the hard problems in the other steps in your pipeline. Are there any other areas there that seem particularly promising to you?
Well, one of the things I really want to get into in the next few years is automated data cleaning and using AI to clean data. Because if you ask an informatician, a biomedical informatician, what they spend, who does machine learning, what they spend their time doing, they would say 70–80% of the time they spend cleaning the data, getting the data ready for the analysis. And, you know, that's, if you think about how much money and time we're investing in cleaning data, it's you know, it's several-fold more than the actual analysis and interpretation. So I think if we could do a better job of automating the data cleaning process, that would greatly speed up research and discovery, you know, I think in a phenomenal way. So that's something I've thought about. I've sketched some ideas out on paper. You know, I would love to write a grant or find some philanthropic dollars to fund that, or maybe start a company. See if Cedars-Sinai would be willing to invest in a company in this space, because you know, you could save billions and billions and billions of dollars every year if you could automate data cleaning across every you know, business, economics, engineering, biomedicine. Every area spends time doing data cleaning.
Well, and not only could you save the money, but you could discover more important things by using the human effort on the more difficult parts of the problem. Yeah. I think that we have used the amount of time that we said we were going to use. Is that about right, Carolyn? So unless there are any last minute pressing questions, I think maybe we could unmute and thank our speaker. I don't know. out clapping on Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm so glad that you were able to do this. And I hope that the participants will take heed of your advice, and they should feel free to contact me as well for any leads in any of the material you discussed. And since we've recorded it, we'll probably have more viewers in the Amherst community who weren't able to make it this evening.
Yeah,
So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Jason, for joining us.
Yep, thank you all. Yep, take care.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, students and colleagues. If you have friends who weren't able to come tonight, please have them email me and I can share the video with them. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a great night.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Fascinating.
Thank you, Robert.
Fascinating. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye, Lee. Bye, Robert.